There's a little trilogy of stories. Hopefully it doesn't seem like a storytelling marathon. There were 3 travelers. And in fact, these travelers were seekers after truth, and they'd been on their spiritual journey for many, many years. And they got into a very deep discussion about the necessity to put into practice what they'd learned in their spiritual travels. But they were so deep in conversation, they didn't realize the time passing and where they were, and suddenly they were in the middle of nowhere, and all they had was a small crust of bread. Well, being the advanced spiritual seekers that they were, they did not get into a fight over the piece of bread, but they decided that they would leave it up to the gods in the night to decide who would have the crust. So in the morning, the first traveler said, "Oh," he said, "in my dream I went to celestial realms, a place where I've never seen before, a place where I've longed to be all my life. And there I met an old man, and he told me that I'd practiced so assiduously that I deserved to have a reward, the crust of bread." And the second traveler said, "Oh, well," he said, I dreamt that I met this famous sage, and he said to me, 'My son, you are now prepared to go out into the world to teach, but you will be busy teaching a lot of people, so you need a crust of bread.'" And the third man said, "Well, I didn't go anywhere. I didn't meet anyone. But I woke up in the middle of the night ravenously hungry, so I ate the bread." And the other 2 travelers were totally affronted. And they said, "Why didn't you consult us?" Well, the third man said, "You were too busy visiting celestial realms and talking to sages. And after all, we had got into deep discussion about putting into practice what we'd learned on our spiritual path." The second story you know well. It's about that king, and he loved cockfighting. And it so happened that this feisty young rooster came into his possession. So he sent an emissary with the rooster to the most famous cockfighting master in the land to be trained. Cockmaster said, "Come back in 2 weeks." So after 2 weeks, the emissary came back. Cockmaster said, No, he's not ready." He said, "Every time, man, woman, or beast, when they come into the barnyard, he preens himself and he postures and he gesticulates to them, and he even threatens them. Come back in 2 weeks." So 2 weeks later, the emissary comes back, and Cockmaster says, No, he's not ready. He's not ready. He said, every time the hens come out of the coop, he mounts them and pecks them to keep them under submission. Come back in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks later, the emissary comes back, and Master says, No, he's not ready. He said, whenever he hears a cock crowing in the distance, he comes out and postures himself and crows. He's not ready. But a couple of days later, the cockmaster takes the rooster to the king, and he says, he's now ready. Whenever anyone enters the barnyard, or the hens come out of their coop, or a crow crows in the distance, a rooster crows in the distance, not a feather is moved. He is now ready. He is invincible, all-powerful. Just as a little aside from this second story, just to bring it down to a personal level, when anyone comes to your house, do you immediately take them in and say, "Oh, come and have a look at my new eiderdown," or maybe you'd like to see my new toolbox? And when you meet someone on the street, or you're sitting over the table having a cup of coffee, and they tell you their troubles, or that they've had something happen to them, some medical problem, and immediately you come in with an antidote or a cure that you've heard of. And when the phone rings, do you immediately jump up to answer it? Just a little aside from this story. The third story is about a young man called Haidar Ali Khan. Now, Haidar Ali Khan was the son of Iskandar Khan. And Iskandar Khan was a very, very wealthy merchant. But he coveted having a relationship with the royal palace. So he decided that he would groom his son, Haidar, to become a member of the emperor's court. So he sent Haidar Ali Khan to the Sufi schools. And Haidar learned the ways of the rituals of the Sufis. He learned their protocols, he learned their dances. And after some while, his father Iskandar took him to the great King Mahmud, and after giving the necessary obeisances, he said, "Monarch, I have brought my oldest and most intelligent son, who I think would be a worthy attribute in your court. He's been trained in the ways of the Sufis." But King Mahmud didn't even look at them. He merely said, "Bring him back in a year." So Iskandar took his son Haidar off, and he sent him to study the ancient texts, the ancient sacred texts, the teachings of the ages, so to speak, written. And after 1 year, he took him back to King Mahmud. And again, King Mahmud said, "Perhaps he can come back in a year." So Iskandar took his son, and this time he sent him on a pilgrimage. He sent him on a pilgrimage to the sacred sites, the shrines that contained the icons, the artifacts, the essence of the great teachers of the ages. And then he took him again to King Mahmud. And again King Mahmud said, "Perhaps he can come back in a year." So Iskandar took his son off again, and this time he sent him to the far reaches of the earth, travels in far-off lands, where he visited those great sages and teachers of all different persuasions. Then, when he came back and again was taken to King Mahmud said, "Well, maybe you can bring him back in another year." But See if you can find him a teacher who will take him. And if he does, he can come back in 1 year's time. So, as it happened, Hyder Ali Khan was able to find that teacher. And he remained with him at his feet. And when Iskander Khan came to take Hyder to King Mahmud, Hyder refused. He remained at the feet of his master and made not a move when his father beseeched him to come with him to King Mahmud. Iskander was broken-hearted. I've wasted all these years. I've wasted all this money. And so he discarded his son. But then on the very day on which Iskander was to take his son back to his emperor, the emperor Mahmud said to his entourage, "Come, we have to journey to Herat." And so, with a great pomp and ceremony, King Mahmud went with his entourage. And when they came to the outskirts of the Tekiya, the house of learning in which Hyder's master resided, King Mahmud and Ayaz, who was his beloved servant from other stories, took off their shoes in reverence. But in the meantime, the master took Hyder by the hand and brought him out to the door of the house of learning, where they met King Mahmud and Ayaz. The Sufi master, who had been the teacher of Hyder, said, "Monarch, while this young man was nothing and a visitor of kings, and now he is visited by kings, take him. He is now ready to..." So there are several questions that arise. The first one, of course, is, what did this Sufi master say? What's the completion of the sentence which begins, "Take him, he is now ready to..." And the second question is, what is the relationship between these three stories from your own experience? How do they come together in us? We've made those spiritual journeys. We put into practice what it is that we've learned. And in this third story, what is it that we're ready to?
To be a king.
To be a king.
You stop searching.
Yes.
Just to be.
Right?
To serve.
Yes.
To be true to ourselves.
Yes.
Also about awareness as to what you can and can't do and what you need to learn and the qualification that you need to get as a being
Mm-hmm.
to do what you need to do in the future. You need to allow time for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a common thing between all stories,
Yes.
is becoming qualified
Mm-hmm.
and then getting ready.
Right. Is that our answer?
To live.
Mm-hmm. Yes? To live? So it does.
Message from +61408153.
E.T. is calling.
Total acceptance as well. I think, when they would, the bread was the centre of attention. They all saw that someone from outside would make a
Decision for them.
It's
Yes.
totally and when someone had got up and eaten it, the others were consternated and angry because it was this
Yes.
sense that that's how the spirit is delivered, in some way.
Yes.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely it does for us, isn't it?
In all the stories, the wisdom seemed to be in the silence,
Yes. In the
the
silence.
non-doing, the non-movement.
Yes.
It's also interesting that when you are actually ready, you need to do something.
Uh-huh.
And you need to embrace whatever it is you're being ready for.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than just still waiting or procrastinating or whatever, do it.
Uh-huh. All right. Now we're getting a little bit to a core.
And the rooster was ready too when it's only ready when it stopped reacting to everything.
Yes, you bet.
That sense of being.
Mm-hmm. 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 So it seems that these three seem to need a little bit of digesting, and perhaps in the coming days, after they have gone through their process within, there will be something that arises in us. Because after all, it is a time where we have been through that process of the Easter, and there is a realization that inevitably comes from that. Because something in us, or all of us in some instances, has been annihilated. Let's see what arises. Perhaps we'll have to make a different forum for that. Thank you.